Let's start with a really basic slide. What is a PSA tool? PSA, there is some medical term out there for psoriasis or something, but we're actually talking in terms of professional services automation. This is a software solution that is meant to really help you gather the basic information you need to run your professional services organization. Yes, it can build upon the concept of basic to be much more advanced and make sure there's compliance and adoption and processes, but at the end of the day, it's a way to gather the information so that you have some place to do the analysis and be able to have more real-time insight into the information going on within your organization. So there are a lot of PSA tools out there. They may focus on things like, oh, I want to track projects more accurately, or I want to make people's lives easier, or I want to make sure I have centralized information, and those are all good reasons to have a PSA tool. Those are all good definitions of a PSA tool. But at the end of the day, really a PSA tool is meant to give you some kind of system to be able to track that basic information you need to do your analysis as you run an organization. Now, the PSA tool that you select really has to meet a number of basic requirements. So first and foremost, even though this may not be in everyone's initial brain, it usually is one of the initial triggers that gets people thinking about whether they need a PSA tool. So my company is starting to grow. I'm growing out of spreadsheets. That's a pretty common statement. I can't manage the business in spreadsheets or Excel anymore. I need to find something else. So making sure the tool is scalable as you grow the company and continue to grow the company and get off those spreadsheets, which are pretty manually intensive in some cases. But as I like to joke, Excel is the best PSA tool out there because you can make it do anything. It's just typing data in. However, it's not something that gives you a lot of visibility unless you do some kind of sharing activity, and it has limitations on the scalability simply because it is so manual. You want a PSA tool that supports your business model and processes. And why is that important? Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to have to craft the way that you run the business, the way that you run your company around the tool that you pick. I have to do profitability reporting this way, or I have to measure utilization that way. You are running the company. You're running a successful company ideally, and you have already defined your business model and the business processes that your team is following to make your company successful. The tool should support that, enhance that, and enforce that. So making sure that you don't sort of change your ways because you picked a tool that looked like it was really cool obviously is a big factor in why you would go to a PSA and what PSA tool is right for you. You want to be able to enable your resources to complete their daily tasks. So a driver for a PSA tool is, yes, I want it to support my business process. Yes, I want to be able to get my information. My executives want to know what's going on in real time, maybe some dashboards. They want it to scale. But you can't forget that probably 90% of the users are going to be the people that are out in the field or hands-on with the computer delivering the services to customers. So making their daily tasks easy to complete is a focus because that's data capture, and that data capture just ripples through everything related to a PSA and the reason to have a PSA. Providing transparency to organizational metrics is a pretty generic statement, but what a PSA tool, since it does capture a lot of information, and we'll get into the components that are typically involved in a PSA tool in just a second. The information that's usually captured is information that is key to basic metrics that help you understand whether your business is healthy, if it's on the right track, or where you need some improvements. Bin-to-win ratios, average bill rates, billable utilization targets, and people achieving those targets, capacity versus actuals, plan versus actuals. Those are all metrics that are indicators of health or process compliance that your individuals are using at various levels. Your executives obviously are looking at overall, probably department level or P&L type reporting, while your PMs are looking at project delivery, making sure they're staying within budget, are they on schedule, and then your individuals are looking to see if they're hitting their targets, if they have some kind of revenue or utilization targets. So each level in the organization has different reporting and data analysis needs. The PSA tool that you select should be able to meet all of those needs because it should be able to collect the data that can support those organizational metrics. And finally, standardizing methodology. So if you've got a successful business in place, you tend to have defined processes in place, or sometimes you're relying on very key individuals that are superstars in your organization. But when you implement a tool, you also have the opportunity to get rid of some of those one-off project plans, those one-off proposals or project bill structures that may be happening because everyone's sort of doing their own thing. They're trying to keep the business going, but with a PSA tool, the structure of the project is going to be X. We want to stay along with X as much as possible. So it gives you an opportunity to introduce methodology as part of the rollout of the tool that may not have been able to be enforced because everyone has their own Microsoft project files, everyone has their own Excel files, and that stands in the way of making sure that you have audit capabilities for adopting standard methodologies. So as you're considering a PSA tool, these are the various areas that you want the tool to be able to meet. And usually they're the reasons that companies start looking for a PSA tool. Number one being, the first one being number one, which is the company is growing out of Excel. It's just taking too long to do work. But the other items are equally as important in understanding what does a PSA tool deliver and what you should be considering in your organization that you need a PSA tool to do. Now, components of a PSA, there's various PSA tools on the market. We'll touch on a few names that you may recognize in a few slides. But a PSA tool at the end of the day is basically there's a concept of a project. So you're delivering work to a customer and it's delivered in the package of a project. At the end of the day, that's what you need to be able to track. Related to that is also your resources that are delivering the work. So who's busy, who's not busy, where can I start planning on hiring new people because we're out of resources, or maybe I have to schedule project work out farther because we're at max capacity for staffing, we can't hire anyone else. All the different things contributing to resource availability to be able to meet the needs of the project management component. Now what's interesting, and there's an industry trend going on, is in the resource management area, in addition to the whole scheduling and understanding the kinds of resources you have, there's a whole human capital management movement and it coupling with PSA solutions. So you'll see the term HCM and systems that focus more on skill sets, career path, leadership, development path type information, and also ways to keep track of your subcontractors and their skill sets and resource pool availability. So resource management in PSA at a minimum is scheduling resources to do the work, but may also expand out to cover things like skill sets and development paths, training development paths or training needs when coupled with an HCM system. So as you're doing the project work, you need a way to capture how much effort have you put into the time cards or into the project. And time cards are very common in PSA tools. You need a way to capture the effort. Why is that important? Well, you price things out based on how much effort you expect it to be. And if the time cards allow you to capture those actuals, so you can do planned versus actuals or estimated versus actuals and continually refine those proposals that you're putting out the door. Same thing for travel expenses. There are a lot of expense reporting systems out there, systems like Concur, for example, that companies will use. But a lot of PSA systems also have an expense tracking tool within them. They may be basic because they are part of a larger solution, but they may be all you need to be able to track those travel expenses that people are incurring along with the project, so you get a total view of the financial components of a project. And speaking of financials, Many PSA tools have some type of, at least some type of billing tracking or some type of reporting that gives you information about what billing should be or what amounts should be invoiced. Some of the larger PSA tools that are more multifunction can even support invoicing. They can support revenue management, but there has to be some kind of financial component as well within the PSA tool. There should also be a cost tracking, not only from an expense tracking perspective, but also from a resource perspective. So you can get things like project profitability reporting or project profitability margin trending to see where you're at as a company if you're achieving what you set out to when you first put the bid out for that project work. And of course, reporting and analytics, huge reason why PSEs are even considered, because when you start outgrowing Excel, you also start outgrowing some of those quick equations and stuff you have in the Excel files to be able to pull the data out really quickly. So reporting and analytics is probably one of the #1 reasons PSA tools are selected, but of course you have to consider the other components in relationship to your organization. So what I like to say, when we talk about PSA, it's got professional services in the name, professional services automation, but quite honestly it's not limited to professional services. I've personally worked with many companies who go beyond just consulting organizations and software companies to things where there's actually implementing network and hardware solutions, maybe entire support teams that have to track types of tickets and effort next to tickets. Equipment installs, like medical equipment installs, creative agencies that are doing all kind of website builds, ad campaigns, paper, physical mail, snail mail type promotions on paper, staffing organizations looking to track the resources they have in-house and who needs those resources. Construction companies that flip houses, those are all projects that need time capture and have activities built out, and training organizations. So there's quite a wide variety of people who have projects and do project work for a customer, and a PSA tool actually can meet the needs of those types of companies. Now, as you can see from this wide list, there are some of these types of companies are very different in what they need to track. Creative agencies need to track media buys and maybe subcontractors or independent consultants that they use to fill the gaps for some kind of web development, while construction people have to track equipment like digging holes and stuff like that, and staffing organizations are really more about the resources. So different focuses on what it means to actually track a project, but a PSA tool, when selected according to their requirements, will be able to support each of those organizations. So, we've already beaten a dead horse with the provides a centralized system of information. A PSA tool has automation as part of the name as well. And so it's meant to automate some of the things that you're doing manually. If you're computing utilization manually in spreadsheets, the PSA tool should be able to do that automatically for you by setting up equations or certain types of reports, and you just basically run the report and the data is already there. So that's where a lot of the automation comes from. It also comes from concepts of approvals or workflow processes where you're having the information routed from person to person to support the business processes you have in place and the compliance to those business processes. So instead of making sure people have, following up with people, did you send so-and-so an email, the system automates that for you so you don't forget. But also another reason a PSA is useful is that it gives you yet another system that can be integrated with other systems that you have within your IT footprint. Specifically things like your finance system, your ERP, maybe hooking into your sales system or CRM so that you're given heads-up information about what projects are coming. We already touched on the HCM idea, but as you take your PSA and you sort of connect it with those other systems, now you have a way to make sure the data flows from system to system and is consistent and accurate without having to do the manual rekey activity. But a common question is, okay, great, I think I need a PSA tool, but what's the best PSA tool for me? My recommendation before you even pick up the the analyst rags to figure out who's the leading vendor is to start with the requirements that you need the PSA tool to meet. And there's a lot that goes into this action, this requirement action. So, going down the list, it's really what's critical for reporting. I always put that number one because I think it's something people focus a lot on. How easy is it for the data to get in? How easy is it for me to maintain the data? But really, at the end of the day, the most important reason you're getting a PSA is how can you get the data back out? How can you make sure you're sending invoices accurately to customers, that you're hitting your utilization targets, that you have people utilized to their fullest extent, and you minimize bench time. Right? So what are those critical reports that you need the system to be able to compute? What's your methodology for project management? Do you do Agile? Do you do Waterfall? Do you track by tasks? Do you have phases? Are your projects more portfolio-oriented where you have parallel work streams? How do you need to track that project information, and how flexible does it need to be able to meet those reporting needs at the end of the day? Your end users are a large majority of the people who will be interacting with the system. What do they need to do their daily job? What do they need to be able to make their life easier as far as data capture? And always consider the mobile aspect. In the world of social media, and everyone's on email, everyone's on Twitter, everyone's on texting and all that kind of stuff. So what can the system support when people are walking around with their tablet or their phone that will help them complete activities if they're not able to get to their laptop or their desktop? Your business process, of course, I've already touched on this. You definitely have to make sure you define your business process. What are the key process areas? What are the key roles and responsibilities in the organization? What is the key handoff and notification and workflow that's needed to occur within the tool to support the business process? And be specific wherever possible. Do you need time cards to be weekly, or maybe the weekly and monthly combination? Do you need the definition of a week to be Saturday to Friday? If you have that kind of specifics that you need to continue with the culture that you've established in your organization, put it in the list of requirements. You definitely want to make sure that you understand what the tool's capability is for auditing. Public companies tend to have to go through audits annually, and so you want to be able to make sure that you can support the information that an auditor may need. And also what compliance that you want to be able to track to make sure people within the organization are complying with the processes that you've put in place. Okay. Collaboration, communication, all that, is making sense. Is it sending out too many emails? Is it not sending up enough emails? Can you, take action within the tool remotely on a mobile device, closing tasks or replying back so that it gets captured in a discussion segment within the tool? Those are all things that it really depends on the culture of your organization and what's best there. And then finally, what are the integration possibilities with the tool? Some tools, a lot of tools now are in the cloud. There's SaaS models, so you log in and you just work with the system, but itself you may want to integrate that with your various other systems. So how easy can it integrate with something you may already have in-house? But once you have the requirements documented, which there's effort here. There's definitely a lot of effort here. I also recommend that not every requirement is equal. So you want to go through and you want to identify at least showstoppers and critical requirements. And when I say showstopper, it's things like there used to be a tool called Quick Arrow. It only worked on integration or Internet Explorer browser. So if your company is flexible and uses Firefox and all the different versions out there, and this tool only works on one of those, then that's a showstopper and you can't select that tool. So identify if there are actually any showstoppers, because immediately you will be able to discount any potential vendors because they can't meet that showstopper. But the critical ones will tend to fall into reporting, accessibility, usability. Now, the challenge with requirements of any type is try to make them specific, try to make them measurable. To say that the system, a requirement saying the system is easy to use, you can't really measure that. Okay, it might be easy to use to someone who's used to working on computers 24/7, and someone who's not used to working on computers may have difficulty navigating. So try to be specific and then identify whether it's critical, because without this requirement it will be difficult to adopt the tool or get meaningful information out of the tool. But there may be some ways that you can work around it. And standard functionality is things like you have to be able to log in, you have to be able to have a password that's encrypted, things that are pretty standard for tools and that you would expect to be available in the PSA tool. But there are always requirements that people are like, boy, it really would be nice if. It'd be nice if the PSA tool can do this. It'd be nice if we could be able to allow people to change the color of their screen. Okay, whether that functionality is there or not, it's maybe something. If you're evaluating tools and they're neck and neck, maybe these desired requirements start having some kind of influence in the final decision. But they are lower priority. You tend to score them lower. And if they're not there, it's not a knock against the tool. It's really just something to consider in the final selection. So I have an example of tool selection requirements that I've worked with customers on. So definitely grouping them by various areas. Things like general requirements, opportunity tracking, project management, resource management, any kind of setup that's required, any kind of workflow that's required, any kind of reporting that's required, and then being able to identify whether it's critical, standard or needed, desired, or showstopper. Okay, and this is probably going to be a pretty long Excel sheet or whatever format you choose to use, but it will be helpful as you move into the next step, which okay, now I need to find a vendor that wants to. I need to evaluate a vendor against these requirements. So there is actually a page out in Wikipedia that I thought I'd throw in the slide deck, and I'll show it to you really quick. But it's really, now look at the analyst and industry reports out there. Of course, the Internet's a wonderful thing. You can do a search and say, give me a PSA tool comparison, and you're at the mercy of whatever website you go to. But there's some pretty common names out there in the marketplace. NetSuite OpenAir and FinancialForce PSA are two that we specifically support. Kimball is an up-and-coming organization. Workday has a PSA tool now. Some like Workfront has @Task, ChangePoint, Projector PSA, MavenLink. These are all names that you've probably heard if you've attended other professional services industry type conversations. And then don't forget some of the big hitters, Oracle and SAP. They have a projects module that plugs into their overall solution. So technically we could call those PSAs as well. The wiki page that I'm referring to is actually here, comparison of PSA systems. And actually it's quite complete. The last time it was updated was this last December, December 15th. So it has information about here about the type of licensing, the type of platform it supports, when the tool was first released, so you can kind of get an age and maturity level from here, basic feature recap, and integrations. So as you go through this, this also highlights which PSA tools are specifically defined for certain types of organizations. So AutoTask is designed for IT organizations. So if you don't follow in that, you can just move on. So there's quite a few here. The list goes on and on. So you probably have connections in the industry to get some suggestions from customers. Of course, if you pick up like a Gartner Magic Quadrant, they'll have information about what tools are ranking highest based on functionality and adoptability. And at that point, you really want to invite your vendors, the vendors that you've selected, to answer questions about your requirements. So this is typically like an RFP, request for proposal. You send the requirements out, maybe a subset of your full matrix, maybe the whole thing, and you ask the vendors to respond. You score their responses to understand how applicable their answers are and how correct their answers are with what you need. And then you select 2 or 3 of those vendors to maybe do an in-person demo or some kind of demo with a script that you define so that you have sort of an apples-to-apples comparison of how this vendor prepared, how the tool works, and how easy is the information to be able to get out of the tool. So a common script would be something like, a day in the life demo. Start from the beginning, create a project, assign resources, enter time, run billing, grab expenses, do reporting. And this is the type of demo that you can give to the vendors that you've selected, saying, I'd like you to do a 2-hour demo following this script so that you have something to evaluate. And then you go through the evaluation again. You just confirm what their initial answers were based on what you saw from the demo. And it's really a matter of, at that point, looking at the scores and making a decision on which of the vendors looks like they're meeting the most requirements, look like it'll be the right fit for the organization. And then, of course, what consulting partner you may want to work with. The vendors all have professional services organizations, but they also have a wide partner network that you can then engage and have a lasting relationship as you continue to evolve your organization, such as Top Step Consulting. So really a PSA tool is meant to empower the organization to be able to manage that information, to be process compliant, to make sure your staff is actually getting their job done the most efficient and effective way possible, and to be able to enforce and introduce those standards that you may have been wanting to do but just didn't have a platform to do it. There is an initial cost, right? There's a cost to purchasing another system. There's a cost to initial implementation. But there are plenty of case studies out there that show the cost pays for itself by simply doing things like increasing utilization, reducing bench time, so you're getting more billable hours in the door, which is increasing revenue. You're reducing customer write-offs because you have more visibility into how the project is going, catching it before it goes off track, and making sure that people are doing their job effectively, getting rid of the redundant Excel updating that has to happen, and really taking advantage of the fact that the tool can automate things.